Command post. Rams dropped and Rangers poured out, establishing immediate security while the helicopters lifted off to orbit nearby. The second lift arrived moments later, delivering more troops and heavy weapons. Within 3 minutes, over 200 Rangers were on the ground and moving uphill toward their objectives under the cover of darkness. The assault hit the Iranian command post like a storm. Zoa Alpha Company scaled the northern ridgeline and engaged anti-aircraft positions with accurate javelin strikes and machine gun fire, silencing the threats in seconds. Bravo Company breached the main bunker entrance using explosive charges and cleared the interior with suppressed weapons and flashbangs. Rangers moved room to room, neutralizing guards and securing the central command room where senior IRGC officers were attempting to destroy documents and servers. A fierce but short firefight erupted near the communications tower, but the Rangers' superior night vision and fire discipline quickly ended the resistance. Key IRGC leaders were captured alive, and technical specialists immediately began exploiting the site for intelligence. The entire raid lasted less than 45 minutes. By the time the sky began to lighten, the command post was fully under Ranger control. Demolition teams set charges on remaining missile guidance equipment and communication arrays, while security elements established a defensive perimeter. As the Night Stalker's MH-47Gs returned for exfiltration, the Rangers fast-roped down, captured high VP value detainees and intelligence packages. The heavy lift helicopters touched down briefly, loaded the force, and lifted away into the morning sky, leaving a small security team to hand over the site to follow on conventional forces. Back at the forward base, Lieutenant Colonel Derek Vance received confirmation of mission success. The destruction of this mountain command post severely disrupted Iran's remaining ability to coordinate attacks in the Central Strait. Captured intelligence included detailed maps of minefields and drone operating procedures that would aid future operations. Later that morning, additional C-17 Globemaster aircraft arrived, carrying reinforcement troops and supplies. As the big ramps lowered, soldiers stepped onto the tarmac, looking out at the desert landscape and distant mountains. For many, this forward base had become their temporary home, a place where they would eat, sleep, and prepare for the next phase of the campaign until the Strait of Hormuz was fully secure. On the captured ridgeline, the Rangers who had stormed the command post stood watch as the sun rose over the sparkling waters below. Lieutenant Colonel Vance looked out across the strait and said to his senior NCO, "We took their eyes and their voice tonight. The high ground is ours. The waters below are safer because of it. The raid sent strong shockwaves through Iranian command. Their mountain stronghold, once considered safe due to its elevation and defenses, had been seized and neutralized in a single night. Missile coordination in the region collapsed, allowing more commercial shipping to resume movement through the strait under American protection." The successful operation by the 75th Rangers, enabled by the unmatched skill of the Night Stalkers flying their MH-47G Chinooks, highlighted the lethal partnership between Army Rangers and their Special Operations aviators. What Iran had built as a protected command node in the heights was now a smoking ruin. Flying global shipping insurance for Gulf transit routes, the Strait of Hormuz became effectively had taken another decisive step. The world's largest oil tanker operators, including China's, were beginning to flow freely again. Saudi Aramco's logistics protected by the Rangers, and Japan's who seized the high ground, and the Night Stalkers all Gulf who delivered them there indefinitely. Simultaneously, on a second front that most Western analysts had not modeled into their pre-war scenarios, Iran activated its proxy acceleration strategy. At 23:47 hours on March 3rd, Yemen's Houthi movement, operating under direct IRGC Quds force coordination through a command relay node in the mountains north of Sana'a, launched the largest single missile and drone strike of the entire Yemen conflict. 42 Birkin, 3 ballistic missiles, and 118C ASF-2K kamikaze drones, targeting simultaneously the Ras Tanura oil export terminal in Saudi Arabia, the King Fahd Causeway connecting the Saudi mainland to Bahrain, and the runway apron at Prince Sultan Air Base, one of the key staging points for USF-35C operations supporting Operation Epic Fury. Saudi THAAD and PAC 3 MSE batteries destroyed 38 of the Birkin 3 missiles above the Gulf Coast. 3 reached Ras Tanura's secondary desalination plant, causing a fire that burned for 9 hours. 2 CASF drones penetrated the base perimeter at Prince Sultan, destroying a C-17 transport aircraft on the ground. The causeway was closed for 11 days, and Iran had not fired a single missile from its own territory. By April 1st, 40 days into the war, the strategic mathematics had shifted in ways no Pentagon pre-war assessment had predicted. Iran had lost its nuclear facilities, its formal air defense network, its supreme leader, and much of the IRGC's senior command tier. But it had not lost its leverage. The strait was still closed. Global oil markets were in sustained crisis. U.S. regional basing infrastructure was being attracted daily by dispersed drone and missile cells that could not be surgically eliminated without destroying civilian infrastructure. And Iran held one more card, a card that was about to be played on the floor of a hotel conference room in Islamabad. At 13:30 hours on April 7th, 6 hours before the deadline, Pakistani intermediaries transmitted Iran's formal 10-point ceasefire proposal to Washington through the Oman back channel, simultaneously relayed through Islamabad. The document later confirmed and partially quoted by Iran's Supreme National Security Council contained the following terms: coordinated Strait of Hormuz passage under Iranian oversight, an end to U.S. military operations against all members of the Axis of Resistance, including Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iraqi Shia militias, full withdrawal of U.S. forces from all regional military bases, financial compensation for war damages inflicted on Iran, and the immediate lifting of all sanctions along with release of frozen Iranian assets, estimated at $6 billion, held in international accounts. In the White House Situation Room, the reaction was bifurcated. The National Security Council, led by Mike Waltz, recommended rejection, a position supported by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who had publicly committed to a campaign that would permanently end Iranian military capacity. The economic team, led by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, presented a different analysis. Oil at $147 per barrel. The Federal Reserve calculating that 6 more weeks of Hormuz closure would tip the U.S. economy into recession territory. Republican senators from oil-dependent states beginning to distance themselves from the war, and the single most sensitive data point in the room. At 14:17 hours that afternoon, the NSA intercepted an IRGC internal transmission indicating that Iran's remaining Shahab-3 and EMAD medium-range ballistic missile batteries, 23 confirmed operational launchers hidden in tunnels beneath the Alborz Mountains and untouched by 40 days of U.S. strikes, had been placed on launch on warning status, pre-targeted against Gulf oil infrastructure. A single coordinated volley from those 23 launchers, striking Saudi Aramco's Upkayak processing facility, which handles 7% of global daily oil supply, would trigger a price shock from which recovery would take 18 months minimum. At 18:30 hours, Trump made the decision. The terms that reached Pakistan's negotiating table were not the 10 points as written. The U.S. accepted 3 core elements: the Hormuz's oversight mechanism, a pause in strikes against axis of resistance targets in Lebanon, and a commitment to begin sanctions negotiations. The other 7 points were deferred to the Islamabad talks. At 19:58 hours, 2 minutes before his own deadline, Trump posted to social media, "Iran has agreed to reopen the strait. I have called off the strikes. We will talk." On Iranian state television, the anchor did not call it a concession. She called it debt of 10. But even as those words traveled across every financial terminal and diplomatic cable in the world, a parallel reality was unfolding in the electromagnetic spectrum that the ceasefire document did not address. At 203 hours, 3 minutes after the ceasefire announcement, U.S. Cyber Command's Persistent Engagement Cell detected a surge of network intrusion activity targeting the supervisory control and data acquisition systems of 3 Saudi Aramco oil pumping stations. The signature was consistent with AP-33, the IRGC's designated cyber warfare unit, operating under the alias Refined Kitten. Iran's missiles had stopped. Iran's cyber operations had not. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, issued an emergency internal alert to Gulf energy operators at 2011 hours, 8 minutes after the ceasefire took effect. The war had changed its domain, not its direction. Simultaneously on the streets of Thrawn, something unprecedented was happening. At 20:30 hours, thousands of Iranians emerged from buildings across the capital, not to celebrate as in the West's framing, but for a purpose that Iranian state media described as a human protection chain, forming physical lines around the city's bridges, power stations, and critical infrastructure nodes. Human shields against the U.S. airstrikes that had not yet come and might now never come if the ceasefire held. There were scenes of men, women, and students standing shoulder to shoulder along the Hemtet Expressway bridge, linking arms around the Shahed Rajeh power plant on Thrawn's eastern outskirts. It was not defiance. It was a population that had spent 40 days under the threat of civilizational erasure, doing the only thing they could still do to protect what was left. Their government called it a great victory. They called it survival. At 22:45 hours, a separate confirmation arrived through Pakistani channels. The ceasefire extended to Lebanon Hezbollah's military wing, which had launched more than 600 Falak 1 and Rod 2 rockets at northern Israeli settlements and U.S. Miseli intelligence coordination sites in the Baqa Valley over the previous 40 days would stand down. Israel privately had not been consulted before this point was added. The Israeli Defense Minister's statement at 23:10 hours was 14 words long. Israel is not bound by agreements made without its knowledge or participation. At 0:14 hours on April 8, 2026, 14 minutes into a new day and 14 minutes into a ceasefire that may or may not hold, AP-8, a Poseidon anti-submarine aircraft on patrol above the Persian Gulf at 23,000 feet, tracked a thermal signature aboard a Type 21 Iranian fast patrol boat heading northeast from Bandar Abbas at 28 knots. The vessel was showing no AIS transponder. It was moving toward Band Arangia. On board, according to Signal's intelligence task against the platform for the past 9 hours, was a human being. The boat had departed the exact grid square where IRGC ground forces had reported a seer prisoner 6 times on a single frequency at 455 hours on April 3rd. The P-8A's crew logged the bearing, the speed, the heading. They transmitted the data to SOCOM, and then, under ceasefire protocols, they turned their thermal camera away, because the ceasefire was in effect, because the rules had changed, because somewhere in a hotel conference room in Islamabad, Pakistan had convinced Washington that 2 weeks of talking was worth more than 1 night of action. Now here's where it gets strategically interesting. The Strait of Hormuz will reopen tomorrow morning. Oil tankers that have been waiting at anchor outside the exclusion zone for 40 days will begin their transit through a waterway, now subject to Iranian coordinated oversight. The world will call it peace. The Pentagon's classified battle damage assessment will call it something else entirely. Step back from the timeline for a moment and run the strategic math. Iran entered this war with nuclear facilities, a formal military command structure, a supreme leader, and international pariah status. 40 days later, it has no nuclear program, no supreme leader, and a devastated IRGC command chain. But it also has oversight authority over the world's most critical oil choke point. A 10-point document it is calling a victory, a cyber war that never stopped. And in the hull of a fast patrol boat, somewhere north of Bandar Abbas, an asset it has not yet played. First, consider what Iran achieved through operational endurance rather than military victory. By closing the strait and sustaining that closure for 40 days, Iran demonstrated that its asymmetric strategy, naval mines, swarm boats, shore-based missiles, and dispersed proxy forces could impose costs that conventional military superiority couldn't overcome within politically acceptable